Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
England's Chief Inspector of Schools, Amanda Spielman, has warned that some parents and religious leaders are trying to actively pervert education. She says inspectors are worried about some people using faith to try to narrow children's horizons, and they mustn't be allowed to dictate school policy on dress or behaviour. Seema Katecha reports from Birmingham.
Just wrap it around like a normal scarf.
These teenage Muslim girls have been wearing a headscarf for a few years now. Their reasons are varied.
This is one way I feel modest because I'm not showing off my hair or worrying about my makeup or whatever.
People who see me, they instantly recognise me as a Muslim, and also if I see other people, then I know that they're Muslim if they're wearing a hijab.
But in recent weeks there's been a row over whether schools should be allowed to ban the hijab. In London, the head teacher of St Stephen's Primary School was heavily criticised for banning girls under the age of 8 from wearing it. She then reversed her decision because of the uproar. Now Ofsted has intervened. Today its chief inspector called on head teachers not to give in to pressure from religious conservatives.
So there is a difficult line between respecting religious requirements and for some wearing hijab post-puberty is seen as a religious requirement. There's a difference between that and cultural preferences, and wearing lipstick and high heels might be one of those.
The Quran, the holy book of Islam, says women should guard their modesty. The text is open to interpretation. Some Muslim women choose to wear it, others don't. But there are strong feelings around whether young girls should be allowed to cover up in schools.
Here in Birmingham, it's not uncommon to see girls who are 4 and 5 wearing the hijab with their uniform. Critics say that if its purpose is to guard modesty, it should only be worn after puberty. If not, Ofsted says that it could be interpreted as the sexualisation of young girls.
In all of our lives and all of our cultures.
Yeah. At one school here, the head teacher is calling for more debate.
It's not an equal practice. Girls wear a headscarf or are expected to, or they can, or when they hit puberty, but boys are not. So it's not an equal practice, and you can't say that it is. So you have to be able to expect to have a really clear and open debate about these kind of things.
Some here argue banning the hijab could itself undermine the right to religious freedom. One mother says sometimes daughters just want to imitate their elders.
Sometimes, children can be quite stubborn and fixed in their way. Then, what can you do? Rather than have tantrums, you have to just sometimes give in. But if they want to do it and, and the school doesn't have any objections, then I don't have a problem with them wearing it.
In cosmopolitan Britain, where different faiths come into contact with Western views, rules in schools can provoke controversy, anger and resentment. Seema Katecha, BBC News.
Now, today, the new head of Ofsted has told schools not to be afraid of standing up to religious groups when making rules for pupils. Her comments follow a row earlier this year between some parents and a primary school in East London, where pupils younger than 8 were banned from wearing hijabs. The headscarf ban has since been overturned by the school governors. But today, in an unusual intervention, Ofsted's chief inspector gave her backing to the head teacher who had imposed it in the first place. So was she right to do so? I'm joined in the studio by Zubaida Haq from the racial equality think tank, the Runnymede Trust, and Amin Alone in Manchester, who has lobbied for the government to stop young girls wearing hijabs in school. Let me begin with you, Amin Alone. Why? Why do you want the government to ban the hijab?
I don't want them to ban the hijab, and I think that it's wrong to frame it like that. What we're talking about is actually stopping young girls, some as young as 3 and 4, being forced to wear sexual modesty clothing, which is what this is about. It's no different to any other religion which is patriarchal interpretations and about women having to cover up. This is not an Islamic requirement, it's a cultural interpretation of religion, and parents should be free to, and parents are free to bring their children up as they like, but in state schools in a secular democracy we shouldn't be sanctioning a kind of pushing of ultra-conservative values, Islamic values, as being normal. It is not normal, and it's about gender inequality, and the fact that we keep saying that people can have religious freedom, and it can dilute gender equality in the year where we're celebrating 100 years of women getting the vote is quite frankly astonishing.
Zubaida Haq, why do you want to defend the rise of parents to make their 3- and 4-year-old children wear the hijab?
Because that's a massive assumption. There's a massive assumption there that there's compulsion. Yes, there is. There's a massive assumption there. Neither Amanda Spielman nor Amin alone have undertaken a widespread study. Neither of them have gone out and consulted with parents, the Muslim parents, the most fundamental group here. Neither of you have consulted with parents, consulted with schools on a widespread basis, engaged with parents, engaged with secondary school girls who, by the way, are more likely to be able to give you eloquent and articulate reasons.
But that's not what Amin Alone's talking about. She's talking about very young children who don't really have a choice, do they?
But Amin Alone still assumes that that's compulsion. How does Amina know that actually young girls are not wearing it because they're mimicking them?
Well, let's ask her that. Amina, how do you know?
First of all, I find it's quite astonishing that you can make assumptions about Ms. Zubaida that you have no idea of. There's groups like Southall Black Sisters, Muslim Women's Network, Asha Women's Refuge, a number of others across this country that have worked with Muslim women for the last 3 or 4 decades that know the cultural kind of pressure put on women to conform and to dress a certain way. No, I have not spoken to every individual child, but that is not the point. The point is we are a secular democracy and our gender equality should not be eroded because of patriarchal interpretations of religion, and to say that we haven't got a right to have this opinion or to lobby on this
no, that's not at all what I'm saying. I am not saying, Amina, that you don't have a right to have an opinion. You and I both know that we both feel very strongly in terms of gender equality, and every woman should be allowed to have a right to speak, to have agency, and to make choices. And actually, that is the issue with Amanda Spielman's hijab ban, that in an ironic way, what she's doing is removing the choice and agency for a woman to choose. Now, putting that aside, you can't also argue that this is a gender equality issue, because actually the one big thing that we're ignoring here is for many Muslim women, this is an identity issue. Now, for young children...
Yes, but we're talking about children. You keep talking about older people.
But we're talking about children.
For young children, although it may not be identity in the sense as it would be for a 14-year-old girl, for younger children, it's identity in terms of feeling part of their community. If their mother wears
how do you know?
If their mother...
You asked her, how do you know?
In the same... Because hundreds of women have spoken to the Muslim Council of Britain. Hundreds of women have written to newspapers protesting about why they wear scarves. I've grown up in a Muslim community. I've grown up in a Bangladeshi community. I am surrounded by women who wear a scarf.
We've only got a minute left, but Amin Alone, I just want to ask you, is it just the hijab that is the real issue here, or are there other religious issues that you think teachers should push back on?
Yeah, we should push back on religious fundamentalism in all schools. And actually, it's not about choice. It is about an encroaching interpretation of religion, which is telling women to cover up. Otherwise, you would not have 42% of Islamic schools that have hijab as part of their uniform. Women would be allowed to go in mosques without having their head covered. Muslim women would show their flesh. They're not allowed to do that. So to say it's about choice is disingenuous.
Can I just say, there is
no, I didn't interrupt you. No, Rebecca, I didn't interrupt you. Have the respect that I gave you.
Please be quick, though, because we're nearly out of time.
Can I just say, there is one fundamental issue here that both you and Amanda make the mistake of, which is, there is the question, do these practices exist? Is there compulsion in some... There is that question. And without a doubt, sorry, can I finish? Without a doubt...
You didn't let me finish. Women's organisations...
Can I finish?
I'm really sorry, neither of you can finish.
Without a doubt.
Because we're out of time. But we'll have to have this debate for a little longer next time. But for now, thank you both. Amin Alone and Zubaida Haq, thank you for coming in.
Well, today, Ofsted's chief inspector threw her full weight behind the head teacher of a predominantly Muslim state primary school in London who wanted to ban the hijab for girls under the age of 8, a move that resulted in the resignation of the chair of governors who'd originally supported the ban. In a speech at a Church of England conference, Amanda Spielman said that schools had to pursue muscular liberalism. and that inspectors are increasingly brought into contact with those who want to actively pervert the purpose of education. Strong words, but strong words too from the Muslim Council of Great Britain, who called the ban appalling and discriminatory. Here's Nick again.
It is one of the great European debates of our age. Just where should religion fit in our public spaces? The avowedly secular state of France has a simple view: no religious symbols in any area associated with the state. Across the Channel, and on the other side of the spectrum, Britain has traditionally allowed religion a place at the heart of its public sphere, generally on its terms.
Close to one of England's grandest cathedrals, the Chief Inspector of Schools declared that neither of those views is right today. Amanda Spielman hailed the role of faith schools in a tolerant society, but she told her audience gathered near St Paul's Cathedral in London that those values of respect and tolerance cannot be used to place all belief beyond criticism.
Ofsted inspectors are increasingly brought into contact with those who want to actively pervert the purpose of education. Under the pretext of religious belief, they use education institutions, legal and illegal, to narrow young people's horizons, to isolate and segregate, and, in the worst cases, to indoctrinate impressionable minds with extremist ideology. Rather than adopting a passive liberalism that says anything goes for fear of causing offence, school leaders should be promoting a muscular liberalism.
The Chief Inspector's warnings were mainly aimed at Islamic extremists, though she does have concerns about intolerance in other faiths. In her mind, Amanda Spielman believes it's important to tackle extremist ideology as well as extremist violence. She has some sympathy for Michael Gove's famous phrase about the importance of draining the swamp and not just beating back the crocodiles that come close to the boat.
The former Education Secretary was speaking in 2014 at the height of a dispute with Theresa May's Home Office in the wake of the so-called Trojan horse row about alleged extremism in Birmingham schools. Today, Amanda Spielman praised a London head teacher who tried to stop young girls from wearing the hijab. And she spoke of reticence among some church schools to challenge fundamentalist practice, as she cited a Tower Hamlets school which lost its Ofsted outstanding rating in 2014 after failing to respond adequately to warnings about extremism.
It means making sure that by being so anxious to do the right thing that we don't accidentally fall into doing the wrong thing. So it's a really difficult balance because we have to make sure that we have tolerance and respect for all faiths and none in our schools. But we can accidentally go so far that we find ourselves tolerating, bringing community tensions into schools.
She's coming and she's recklessly playing divide and rule politics with different faiths. So I think there are big questions there. But also, it's not just the divide and rule, it's the singling out and the demonisation of Muslim communities that I think that most third sector organisations are extremely uncomfortable with.
Young children of all faiths and none will be skipping, walking or dragging their feet to school in the morning. Little do they know that they lie at the heart of a passionate debate about the values of their country.
Nick Watt. Well, Amanda Spielman is with me now. Good evening. First of all, can I just quote something from your speech today? You said, Ofsted inspectors are increasingly brought into contact with those who actively pervert the purpose of education. What do you mean by that?
Well, I'm afraid there are a few schools in the state sector and independent schools, as well as some unregistered establishments, where we find really unsatisfactory things being taught. I've talked before about the kinds of books we found, not just in libraries, but being taught from, encouraging husbands to beat their wives, saying that women can't refuse sex to their husbands. Those things are simply not compatible.
But those presumably are in a tiny minority of schools.
That's quite a small minority, indeed quite a small minority of schools. But we're also coming across increasingly evidence that there are tensions in communities, often between different parts of the same faith, not necessarily between faiths, between different parts of the same faith that are being...
For example?
So, for example, tensions between those Muslims who like very young girls to wear the hijab and those who most definitely don't. And we see these tensions being imported into schools. So part of our responsibility is to make sure that all children have the right educational experience, and we have to look at these things.
But you make clear in your speech that we're not simply talking about Muslim faith.
We're absolutely not, no.
But proportionately, are there more issues there than there are, for example, in Anglican schools or in Hasidic schools or whatever?
It's very hard. I don't have numbers at my fingertips, but yes, we do. But we see it. The point is that we see it in schools of all flavours. There are fantastic schools of every faith as well as no faith, and there are schools that cause us concern in every quarter as well.
You talk particularly, let's turn now to this primary school in Newham in East London, and you talk about this what's happening there and the response to the hijab ban as a matter of regret. Now, what you were saying in your speech today was that this school introduced a ban on young girls under the age of 8 wearing the hijab, and you very strongly supported the head in her freedom to do that.
I did, and this is the kind of thing that I was warning about in some comments I made late last year, which got quite a lot of attention at the time, and it was represented as being Islamophobic. It absolutely isn't. This is a concern about bringing adult pressures and disagreements to bear on young children in primary schools.
I'm interested in this because, in fact, this Newham Primary is an outstanding school academically, and presumably it's had an outstanding report before you did bring Ofsted inspectors in yesterday, but it has achieved a lot. So if that's the case, why do you think that you have to step in and say what this teacher is doing is correct if the school's actually thriving?
Because we look not just at the educational outcomes, we have to look at the personal development and welfare of the children. So if we see things that suggest there's any kind of bullying going on in the school, for example, that's the kind of thing our inspectors always look at. They talk to groups of children, they get a sense of whether the culture, the pressures in the school are as they should be, or whether there are things that...
Well, interestingly, because I suppose what you could say is, if you've said in a major speech that you back the teacher because wearing the hijab for under 8s, in your view, is wrong. Is that something... No, wrong for this school. Is this something that you think that you could say, well, actually, wearing the hijab after puberty is right, or, you know, I think I support the idea that no child under 8 should be able to wear the hijab, or is it just simply this one school?
No, it's not this one school, but the point is the head made a decision, and as far as I...
On what basis did you make the decision?
On the basis that it is clearly the responsibility of the head to set the uniform policy of the school.
But why, what was her reasoning for not allowing kids under 8 to wear the hijab?
Because that is before the age of puberty. There is no religious requirement for children of that age to wear it. It's a cultural preference, it's not a religious requirement.
But you're saying it's a cultural preference, not a religious requirement. So that school's one thing, other schools are another thing. But I wonder if by Ofsted taking, you know, the most senior figure in Ofsted, taking a position on this, you're actually stepping into an area that actually you would rather it was devolved to heads in the first place, wouldn't you?
No, this is something that is very much our concern. When we see that a school is being bullied, as far as we can see, the school took the decision properly some months ago, actually, and this policy had been running for a while. And it's when the school attracted some media attention, suddenly a great deal of pressure was brought to bear on it, not in the immediate school community, but from a much
But you put
wider...
inspectors in yesterday, and I wonder if the possible outcome of that could be something that's antithetical to a lot of Muslims who say, we would rather we had this policy. And I wonder if there's a danger that in sometimes you conflate what might be seen as conservatism with extremism.
No, on the contrary, there are some very different issues, and we haven't got time to unpack them all here today. But it is so important that schools can take their schools have a responsibility to promote cohesion. In a very diverse world, they can never give every parent exactly what they want, but they have to be able to take sensible decisions for the benefit of all children. And what I'm concerned about is when I see schools losing the authority and space to take the right decisions.
Moving on to a more general point now, because we actually have a new Education Secretary for the last 2 weeks, and I wonder if you would like to see that Education Secretary press ahead with a kind of revived grammar school programme, given that it was in the Conservative manifesto.
That is indeed something that was in the Conservative manifesto. It's not something that I have taken a policy position on. My job is to inspect schools.
Do you think, the addition of more grammar schools would be valuable?
That's not something I've expressed an opinion on before, and I'm not going to express one now.
Thank you very much, Amanda Spielman. Well, let's discuss this further. With me in the studio is Geeta Sahgal, who is the founder of the Centre for Secular Space, which campaigns for secular voices in public life. And down the line from Birmingham is Sajid Gulzar. He is Chief Executive and Executive Head of the Prince Albert Community Trust, which runs 3 schools in the city. Good evening to both of you. Sajid Gulzar, I wonder first of all if I can ask you, what message do you think Amanda Spielman is giving out by backing Newham?
Well, firstly, I think any school needs to be free to set its own uniform policy, and there is no requirement for Muslim girls of the age of 8 or below to wear the hijab. But equally, I'm not sure how the banning of the hijab fits in with the British value of mutual respect and tolerance for all faiths.
So in your school, would girls of any age, for example, be allowed to wear the hijab? Would anyone that wants to wear something of a religious nature, you know, I mean a cross or whatever, be allowed to wear it?
Well, absolutely. Within reason, we have many Muslim girls who wear the hijab. We have many who don't. In my almost 20 years in education, I've not come across any community tensions between those who do and those who don't. In fact, we have families where you may have 2 sisters who send their children to the school, one wearing hijab, one not. It's never really been a problem.
Just coming on to talk to you, Geeta, do you think that, you know, as we've just heard there, mutual tolerance, allowing people to wear what they wish, when they wish, is a good thing in British society?
I think we're confusing the issue of growing fundamentalism with tolerance. And this morning, Amanda Spielman, when she gave her speech, and it was in front of a Church of England audience, in very carefully considered words, did suggest that faith schools, A, are not talking to each other necessarily, that the church is not sufficiently challenging fundamentalists among their midst, and regretted that the church was hindering the registration, the inspection of unregistered schools. So this problem is wider than that of Muslims. Therefore, when we look at the issue of tolerance, we can't narrow it to the issue of the hijab. I think that the promotion of the hijab, and we have to be very, very clear, this hasn't just happened because of individual choices. There has been a distinct policy led by the Muslim Council of Britain to promote the hijab in mainstream schools. And many schools have adopted it as a policy when it has been completely unrecognized in traditional Muslim cultures,
but would you
worn by very young girls.
But are you talking about coercion, or are you talking about freedom to choose? Because you would hear from Birmingham that there is a freedom to choose, and often within families, girls dress differently.
Yes, there may be a difference in families, but what we're seeing in the promotion of very young children, not only wearing hijab, girls wearing hijab, but the promotion of fasting. St. Stephen's School was under fire. The school in Newham, which banned the hijab, had also banned fasting. Children were fainting in school. Sometimes staff were fainting away in school.
Well, let's
that is a health and safety and a safeguarding issue.
That is an assertion you're making. I'm afraid we have no proof for that, but it's not that I disbelieve you.
I talked to the former head
it's not that I disbelieve you. I want to put that to
the chair of governors of St. Stephen's School, and this is the claim he made. I don't think he was lying.
Right, well, let me just put this to Sajid. Are there certain things within your school that you say are simply not acceptable? For example, fasting. Would that be acceptable? Or are there other things that you say, look, this is the curriculum, this is the way I run my school, this is what I'm going to do?
I think the point is one of dialogue and of working with the community that you serve, regardless of what faith background or cultural persuasion that community is. I mean, we take a stance on fasting. We strongly discourage children from fasting when the fast is particularly long, as it has been in recent years. In fact, we ask local imams to come in and speak to the parents, and when we have that dialogue and we have that discussion, there really isn't a problem. I mean, I don't know of any promotion of hijab that Geeta's just mentioned. It's certainly outside of my experience of being a head teacher and responsible for several schools in Birmingham. It's not something that I've come across in Birmingham. I know of no promotion of hijab in that respect at all.
But I wonder, just
Let
coming
me
back...
explain if Mr. Gulzar hasn't come across it. The Al-Hijra Trust, which challenged Ofsted finding gender segregation discriminatory in a school that was supposed to be a mixed-sex school and had severe gender discrimination policies and extremist literature on its premises, was a body that actually wrote policy on promoting segregated attitudes for Muslim children in mainstream schools.
Let me just put that to Amanda Spielman, who's still here. It's only fair to put it. Let me just put that to Amanda Spielman. What do you say about that?
Well, firstly, it's absolutely right. And secondly, I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name, but what you said, Sajid, you absolutely use your role as a head to decide what is and isn't acceptable and to set boundaries. You said you strongly discourage fasting, and that's exactly right. It is your responsibility as a head to make those decisions.
Do you think the decisions of heads are being eroded?
Well, I think that's precisely what we saw at St Stephen's. We saw a policy which had been in place for some months and accepted, not necessarily liked by every single parent, but was accepted. And we saw outside groups come in and put pressure on the school to reverse the policy, who were not part of the school community, who were very much zooming in from outside.
And are you going to be on St Stephen's case? You're not just going to make the speech and leave, you're actually going to follow this through to get a good atmosphere in the school if you think it's lacking?
Ofsted is only the inspectorate. All we can do is to report on what we find, and that's why we visited the schools, so that we can report.
Thank you all very much indeed.